Welcome back. Hey, my dear friends. Tonight, I invite you to journey back through the mists of time to a land of ancient forests, windswept hills, and crumbling stone castles hidden among the green. A land where magic once stirred in the rivers and trees, where dragons whispered through the clouds, and where destiny was not chosen, but forged in battle, in sacrifice, and in legend. This is the story of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, the tale of a once and future king, born in secret, raised in obscurity, and chosen by fate to unite a fractured land. A tale of noble quests, enchanted swords, mysterious prophecies, and the timeless struggle between honor and temptation, light and shadow, peace and war. It is a story passed down for centuries, told by candlelight, sung by bards, carved into stone, and woven into the very fabric of English myth. Before we begin, I'd love it if you could take a moment to comment where in the world you'd call and what time it is for you there. It's always a quiet wonder to see listeners gathering from across the globe, settling in each night to drift off together to stories like this one. Now, put your phone on Do Not Disturb. Let the room be still. Adjust your covers, settle into your bed, and let your limbs grow heavy. There's no rush, no noise, nothing that needs to be done. For the next few hours, all you need to do is listen. Let the gentle rhythm of the story unfold around you, like pages turning in a dream. Even if sleep comes before the end, the story will still find its way to you. Imagine yourself beneath the gray skies of an ancient island. A cool breeze rolls over the hills, a raven calls from a high stone tower, and far away, the echo of hooves on cobblestone fades into silence. Somewhere in the distance, a sword lies waiting in a stone, and from that moment, history becomes legend. Tonight, you'll hear the entire story of Arthur, his birth, his rise, his court of knights, and his final journey to Avalon. You'll meet Merlin, Guinevere, Lancelot, Galahad, and the many others whose fates were bound to the crown of Camelot. You'll follow noble quests and quiet betrayals, magical relics, and mortal choices, all set within the misty dreamscape of a kingdom that once was, and might one day be again. But for now, there is only you and the legend waiting to begin. Let us journey now into the entire story of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, the prophecy and the sword in the stone. Long ago, in a land not yet called England, where the moors rolled endlessly beneath the silver, sky and mist curled around the roots of ancient oaks, there was a kingdom teetering on the edge of collapse. The land was divided, fragmented into rival lords and quarreling kings, each claiming dominion, each holding fast to their own scraps of power. There was no unity, no peace, only war, border raids, and bitter old feuds passed down from father to son. But in the shadows of that broken realm, something stirred, a whisper of change, a prophecy, older than memory, carried on the breath of the wind, and held in the dreams of druids and seers. It was said that a true king would come, not one born of pride or conquest, but one chosen by fate, a child of mystery, a child of magic, one who would unite the land beneath a single crown, and bring forth an age of harmony and justice. This prophecy lingered like smoke across the countryside, never fully seen, never quite forgotten, and in time, it came to rest in the heart of a man who did not wear a crown, but held power all the same. Merlin the Enchanter. Merlin was unlike any other, not merely a magician or wizard, but a creature of both this world and another. He was born, it is said, of a mortal woman and a spirit, not a demon as some feared, but a being of air and knowledge and the old magic of the stars. With eyes that seemed to peer not just at you, but through you, Merlin walked between the threads of time itself. He saw past, present, and future as one great tapestry. And in that tapestry, he saw a boy not yet born, a boy who would become king. But for that prophecy to take shape, something had to be done. The throne of Britain, such as it was, lay in chaos after the death of Uther Pendragon, the High King. Uther had ruled with might and cunning. Yet he had left no public heir, and after his passing, the realm fractured further still. What few knew, what Merlin alone had orchestrated, was that Uther did in fact have a son. This boy had been born under a veil of secrecy during a time of great peril. Uther, desperate for the love of Igraine, the Lady of Cornwall, had entered into a dark pact. With Merlin's aid, Uther had taken on the appearance of Igraine's husband, Duke Gorlois, and in the disguise of the Duke, he spent a single night in Tintagel Castle with her. That night, a child was conceived, and as the morning dawned, Gorlois lay dead on the battlefield. Igraine grieved the loss of her husband, unaware that the man who had visited her that night had not been him at all. When the truth came to light, Igraine became Uther's queen, and their son, Arthur, was born. But Merlin, ever watchful, knew that such a child, born of such circumstances, would be the target of those who sought power. He convinced Uther to entrust the boy to him, and so, in secret, Arthur was spirited away as an infant and placed in the care of a loyal knight, Sir Ector, to be raised as a humble squire, far from court, unaware of his true lineage. Arthur grew up in the countryside, chasing geese, mucking out stables, sharpening blades, and learning to ride. He was quick with his hands and quicker with his mind, kind-hearted and always curious. To him, Sir Ector was simply his father, and Kay, Ector's boisterous and sometimes arrogant son, was his older brother. He never suspected that his bloodline carried the hopes of a kingdom. Years passed, and the kingdom continued to wither under the weight of ambition and division. Then one winter morning, when the snow lay heavy across the hills, and the bells of cathedrals rang hollow in the cold, a strange sight appeared in the heart of London. In the courtyard outside the great church of St. Paul's, a stone rose from the frozen earth. No one saw it placed there, no carts, no footprints. It was simply there, as if it had always been. Embedded within it was a great sword, its blade shining even in the dull grey light, its hilt wrapped in worn leather and gleaming with the emblem of a dragon. Upon the stone, inscribed in curling ancient letters, were these words: "Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is rightwise king, born of all England." Words spread like wildfire. Peasants and nobles alike gathered around the church, staring at the strange spectacle. Some prayed, some laughed, and others, many others, tried their luck. Dukes, knights, barons, mercenaries. One by one, they came forward, and one by one, they failed. The sword would not move. It was as if it had fused with the stone, part of it, inseparable, immovable. The archbishop declared it a sign from God. Others whispered of Merlin's magic. A great tournament was declared to coincide with the festival of the New Year, and knights from all corners of the land were invited to compete. Perhaps it was thought the man destined to pull the sword would reveal himself in battle first. Among the knights who came was Sir Kay, now grown and eager to prove himself. He arrived with his father, Sir Ector, and Arthur still his squire. Arthur carried Kay's gear, polished his armor, and prepared his horse. But in the bustle of the crowd and the rising excitement of the tournament grounds, Kay realized he had left his sword behind at their lodging. In a fluster, he sent Arthur running back through the streets to retrieve it. Arthur raced off, his boots kicking up dust and frost. But when he reached the house, he found the door locked and no one inside. The sword was out of reach, and the tournament had already begun. Desperate not to return empty-handed, Arthur's eyes fell upon the churchyard, the sword, the one in the stone. He had heard the stories, everyone had, but to him it was just a sword, just something he needed. He crossed the quiet yard, the cold air biting at his skin. Birds fluttered in the eaves of the church. The square was still, and with no ceremony, no audience, and no awareness of the destiny he was walking towards, Arthur stepped up to the stone. He gripped the hilt and pulled. There was no struggle, no resistance. The blade slid free, as though it had been placed there just for him. Arthur stared at it, confused. It felt natural in his hands, balanced, familiar, even. He brought it back to Kay, who stared wide-eyed at the weapon. Sir Ector, too, recognized it immediately. They returned to the stone together, and Kay attempted to replace it, but it would not go in. Ector tried to pull it. Nothing. Kay tried again. Still nothing. Then Arthur stepped forward once more, and again it came free, as easily as if it were a branch plucked from a tree. Ector fell to one knee. Kay followed. Arthur stood stunned, holding the sword aloft, as crowds began to gather, murmurs rising like a tide. At first, there was disbelief, then denial, then challenge. A new test was proposed. Arthur would be asked to pull the sword from the stone in the presence of every high lord in the kingdom. They arranged it on the Feast of Candlemas, then again at Easter, then at Pentecost. Each time nobles from every corner of Britain gathered. Each time Arthur alone drew the blade. By Pentecost, the people could deny it no longer. This boy, this humble squire, was their king. Some objected, many scoffed, but those with wisdom saw what Merlin had always seen, that greatness does not wear a crown at birth, nor shout for attention. It grows slowly, quietly, until the moment comes when it can no longer be denied. Arthur was crowned soon after, beneath banners of crimson and gold, with the archbishop blessing, and the sword still in his hands. He was only a boy, but within him burned the promise of unity, of a land no longer divided, of a kingdom reborn. But of course, that story was only just beginning. Arthur becomes king. The boy who pulled the sword from the stone did not look like a king. He was not draped in velvet, nor armored in steel. He did not ride a white stallion, or speak with the practiced tone of command. He stood quiet, uncertain, the wind tugging at his cloak, his hand still wrapped around the hilt of a sword that had refused all others. The crowd had parted around him that Pentecost morning, half in awe, half in disbelief. Those who had tried and failed to draw the sword now whispered among themselves. Some clutched at pride, others at fear. Was this truly the heir to Uther Pendragon? Could a stable boy wear the crown of Britain? The archbishop, robed in white and gold, stepped forward. With solemn eyes, he read aloud the prophecy once more. Then, before all gathered there, lords, knights, clergy, merchants, and common folk alike, Arthur was named rightful king of all England. But naming a king and accepting one are not the same. The moment the crowd cheered, a dozen noble houses turned away in silence. Among the most powerful in the land were the kings and warlords who had carved the kingdom into pieces after Uther's death. Men like King Lot of Orkney, King Urien of Gore, King Nentres of Garlot, and others each held castles, soldiers, and ambition. They had come to London expecting a tournament, and left instead with a boy crowned in front of Gore. Anscan. Some claimed it was trickery. Others said Merlin had used sorcery. A few accused the archbishop of manipulation, that he had sought to raise a puppet he could control. The seeds of rebellion were sown within the weak. Arthur, for all the weight of destiny upon his shoulders, was barely 15 years old. He had no army of his own, no fortress, no royal treasury. The sword alone could not protect him, but Merlin had not disappeared. The old wizard returned to Arthur's side, cloaked in grey, his beard catching the spring winds like trailing mist. He counseled Arthur quietly but firmly, urging patience, restraint, and courage. This crown was not given for comfort, Merlin told him. It was given to bind the broken. You must not wear it for yourself. You must wear it for them. In the days following the coronation, Arthur took up residence in the great hall of London's old Roman keep, its stone walls moss-covered, its windows narrow and dark. From here, he began to issue royal orders and edicts, and knights loyal to his father began to rally to his side. Sir Ector swore fealty before the court, and Kay was knighted officially, though still prideful as ever. More knights trickled in, some drawn by duty, others by curiosity, and a few by the whisper of Merlin's name. But even as this small court took shape, word arrived from the north. King Lot and a confederation of rebel lords had declared war. Their armies were on the march, claiming Arthur to be a false king, a commoner's brat with no right to rule. They would ride south, seize the capital, and place one of their own upon the throne. Some even whispered of declaring independence, carving the kingdom apart once and for all. Merlin was unmoved. He knew the battle would come. He had seen it. But what he had not seen, what no one had truly expected, was the will that burned within Arthur. It was not loud. It did not boast or rage, but it was steady, quiet, and firm as iron. Arthur did not flee the city. He did not retreat to seek allies or hide behind walls. Instead, he called what few knights he had and rode out to meet the rebel kings face to face. The two forces met upon the wide rolling hills of Bedtime, where early summer winds sent ripples across the grass like the sea. Arthur's army was small, barely 500 men. His enemies outnumbered him more than 3 to 1, yet Arthur stood at the front of his line, not at the rear. Merlin, who had journeyed with him, disappeared into the woods at dawn, murmuring to the sky and to things unseen. Some said he summoned spirits, others that he turned the wind against the enemy's arrows. Still others believed he simply waited for the right help to arrive, and arrive it did. Just before the battle began, a second army appeared, not marching against Arthur, but beside him. King Ban of Benoic and King Bors of Gaul, powerful rulers from across the Channel, had come with their knights and archers and war horses. They owed Merlin favors from years past, and Arthur, young as he was, had stirred something in them, something long forgotten, hope. With Ban and Bors at his side, Arthur charged. The Battle of Bedtime lasted 3 full days. Smoke rose over the fields like storm clouds. Steel clashed in the gullies. Trumpets called across the ridges. Arthur fought not as a boy, but as one born for war. He moved with precision, led with calm, and struck with purpose. On the final morning, the rebel kings broke and scattered. King Lot barely escaped with his life. Arthur rode back to London victorious. But it was more than a military win. It was a symbolic one. The boy king had faced the greatest powers in the land and prevailed. From there, momentum began to shift. Lords who had once doubted now bent the knee. Even those who disliked Arthur's lineage began to respect his mind. He listened. He judged fairly. He forgave with dignity, but punished with resolve. His court began to swell, not with flatterers, but with those who believed, truly believed, that a new age was dawning. Still, not all was peaceful. As Arthur's power grew, so too did the complexity of ruling. Bandits still plagued the woods. Old feuds flared between vassals. Invaders from Ireland and the Saxon coast launched raids that tested the young king's resolve. In every decision, Arthur leaned on counsel. Merlin remained ever watchful, sometimes cryptic, often vanishing for days at a time. But Arthur also turned to men of action. Sir Ulfius, a veteran of Uther's campaigns, Sir Brastias, who rebuilt the city watch, and Sir Bedivere, one of the first knights to offer not just sword, but soul to the cause. During these years, Arthur began the long task of building a court worthy of legend. He founded what would become Camelot, not as a palace of luxury, but as a symbol of order and equality. The name was old, borrowed from forgotten ruins, and woven into new stone with each passing season. He sent envoys to distant lands, forged alliances with kings and queens across the sea, and began the great unifying reforms that would bind the kingdom together in ways even Uther had never achieved. But Arthur was not without enemies still. Morgan le Fay, half-sister to Arthur through Igraine, watched his rise with quiet hatred. She had been raised far from him, steeped in arcane knowledge and shaped by bitterness. Though she did not yet strike openly, her mind turned constantly toward revenge. And elsewhere in the dark forests and shadowed valleys, remnants of the old ways, wild magic, creatures untouched by time, and ancient grudges watched the new king from afar. Yet through it all, Arthur remained resolute. He believed in justice. He believed in unity. And more than anything, he believed that a better world was not only possible, but worth fighting for. Years later, many would point to the moment he pulled the sword from the stone as the turning point of Britain's destiny. But those who truly knew Arthur, those who served with him, rode beside him, and stood guard outside his council chamber late into the night, they would say the real turning point came after. Not in a moment of magic, but in the hard, quiet days of early kingship, when he faced rebellion, when he earned trust, when he chose not to be a ruler of fear, but of purpose. He did not yet have a round table. He did not yet wear the title of High King, but in the minds of his people, something had begun to shift. Not just a new king, a different kind of king. And in time, the bards would sing of a golden age, the age of Arthur, the founding of Camelot, and the Round Table. In the years that followed Arthur's early victories, the kingdom began to breathe again. For the first time in a generation, the fires of war no longer scarred the countryside. Smoke no longer rose from pillaged villages, and roads once haunted by bandits grew safer under the watchful eyes of mounted patrols. Markets reopened. Old alliances were reforged. Fields once abandoned to weeds were tilled again by weathered hands. But the land remained fragile, like clay newly softened by rain. It could be shaped, but it could just as easily be shattered again. Arthur knew this. He had won battles, yes, but battles did not make a kingdom, not truly. A kingdom required more than strength. It needed structure. It needed trust. It needed a center. Not just a throne, but an idea. He began to search for a place to build that idea, a capital unlike any before it. The ruins of old Roman outposts still dotted the landscape, crumbling walls overgrown with moss, watchtowers long abandoned, foundations left half buried beneath grass and root. But Arthur did not want a city built on the ghosts of empire. He wanted something new, something that would rise not from conquest, but from purpose. Then, high upon a hill in the west, nestled between green ridges and a river that wound like silver thread through the valley below, Arthur found it. There was little there at first. A few stones, the remains of an old hill fort, wild flowers growing between the cracks. But when Arthur stood atop that hill and looked out at the land, its gentle slopes, the morning mists that pulled like soft wool in the hollows, he felt something, a stillness, a center. This, he decided, would be the heart of the realm. And so the work began. Stone by stone, wall by wall, a new city began to rise. It was not built in haste. There were no towering spires, no gaudy monuments to wealth. Instead, it grew with care, modest, clean, fortified against invasion, yet open enough to welcome guests from any corner of the kingdom. They called it Camelot. The name came from an older tongue, half remembered from the days of druids and hill tribes. Some said it meant fort of the lake, others throne among the hills. Its true origin was lost, but it didn't matter. What mattered was what it became. Camelot was not merely a city. It was a symbol, a place where lords and commoners alike could come without fear, a place where disputes could be resolved with reason instead of blood, where courage was honored but wisdom was listened to. Merlin, still a guiding hand behind Arthur's vision, oversaw much of the design, though he left little trace of his influence. He insisted on wide courtyards and gardens for quiet thought, tall windows for light to flood the halls, and strong outer walls made not only of stone, but of shared labor from every region of the kingdom. Each province sent workers, stone cutters, masons, carpenters. It was said that no single corner of Britain could claim Camelot for its own, because it belonged to all. In the very center of the castle grounds, Arthur ordered the construction of a great hall, but this hall, too, would be unlike any other. Traditionally, a king's hall held a long table, at the head of which the monarch presided. This arrangement made status clear. There was one seat of power, and all others bent toward it. But Arthur wanted something different. He had begun to gather around him knights from across the land, men of skill and valor, yes, but also of conscience. He was building not an army, but a fellowship, one that would transcend bloodlines and banners, one that would stand for ideals greater than any crown. To sit among them was to accept not only a place in court, but a code, a quiet, binding agreement to serve justice, protect the innocent, and seek truth even when it was hard, especially then. And so he commissioned a table, not long and narrow but round. It was enormous, crafted from oak that had stood for centuries before being felled in the northern forests, its grain polished to a gentle sheen, its edges smooth and without head or foot. There would be no above or below at this table. No seat would sit higher than another. All who sat there would be equals. All voices would be heard. This idea was radical, almost unthinkable, to many lords who had been raised in the traditions of hierarchy and deference. But Arthur held fast. He believed that unity could not be imposed by rank. It had to be chosen. At first, only a handful of knights joined him. Sir Bedivere, the first to kneel after Arthur's battle at Bedegraine. Sir Kay, still brash and proud, but tempered by loyalty. Sir Griflet, the youngest, barely more than a boy, but fierce in his sense of right. Sir Lucan, quiet and thoughtful, with eyes that saw more than he spoke. They took their seats, not with ceremony, but with quiet reverence. Each seat bore the knight's name, carved into the wood by Merlin himself. Over time, new names were added. Some would rise to great fame, others would fall in battle, their seats left empty in mourning and memory. The number of seats grew, 12, then 24. Eventually, the table held 150, and in the center of the hall, suspended above the round table, hung the Siege Perilous, a single seat that remained unfilled. Merlin had declared it so. This seat would remain empty until the day came when a knight of perfect purity, courage, and humility would appear. Only he would be able to sit there without perishing. Until then, it served as a reminder that no matter how noble the court, perfection was not yet achieved. But it wasn't just knights who gathered in Camelot. Scholars came, philosophers, healers, farmers, priests, women of learning, children from far-off villages. Camelot's gates were open to more than warriors. It became a center of learning, of diplomacy, of slow and thoughtful peace. Arthur held court weekly, not merely to issue decrees, but to listen. He settled land disputes. He eased tensions between clans. He oversaw treaties and reconciliations. And always, he returned to the round table, not as a throne, but as an anchor. In time, stories of the Round Table spread far beyond Britain's shores. Singers in France and Wales began to carry the names of Arthur's knights in song. Merchants whispered of a city where no bribe could sway a judge. Peasants dreamed of a place where even the lowborn could speak and be heard. To the people, Arthur became more than a king. He became a standard, a measure of what leadership could be. But none of this happened overnight. The construction of Camelot took years. The culture of the Round Table took longer. Still, there were mistakes, arguments, occasional betrayals, but Arthur never let the dream fade. He kept the code simple but firm, to never do outrage nor murder, to flee treason, to give mercy to those who ask for it, to protect the weak, to fight for the rights of all, to serve the realm before oneself. Each knight swore this code upon his blade before taking his seat. It was not always followed perfectly. Knights are still men, and men are still flawed, but the code endured like stone beneath wind. Even those who strayed from it would remember it, feel its weight, and return when they could. In Camelot, the kingdom found its center, not just a castle, not just a city, but a dream made real. A dream that across a land long divided, justice could prevail. That courage could serve, not command. That truth, however hard, was always worth seeking. The Round Table would go on to host countless legends, but its greatest legend was not any one knight. It was the idea that they sat together, not as rulers, but as brothers. And at the heart of it all, still young, still learning, but already becoming the king he was meant to be, sat Arthur, not above, not below, but among them, the once and future king, Excalibur and the Lady of the Lake. Though Arthur had pulled a sword from the stone to claim the crown, that blade, splendid as it was not destined to be the one he would carry through legend. That sword, like the right it symbolized, had served its purpose. But soon after the kingdom began to settle, and the walls of Camelot rose skyward, the blade that had chosen Arthur would break. It happened not in war, but in defense of justice. A petty warlord in the north, one who refused to kneel to Arthur's rule, had taken up arms against a village under the crown's protection. Crops were seized, the people enslaved, and their pleas ignored. Arthur did not send knights. He went himself. The warlord's forces were swift and brutal, but Arthur met them with unwavering resolve. In the midst of the fray, steel clashed with steel beneath stormlit skies. The blade Arthur had drawn from the stone, so long unmovable, so long revered, shattered in his hands during the duel. A clean break, a hiss through the air. The steel fell in 2 pieces to the mud, but Arthur, unarmed, fought on. He did not retreat. He wrestled the warlord to the ground and bound him with his own chainmail. It was not the sword that made Arthur a king. It was the heart that beat without it. Yet a king must still carry a sword, and this loss, symbolic and practical, troubled Arthur deeply. He returned to Camelot, wounded not in body, but in spirit. It was Merlin who spoke of the lake. Not a lake found on any map, not a place visited by traders, or seen by shepherds as they drove their flocks through the moors. This lake, he said, was hidden, tucked not only in the folds of the land, but between the veils of the world itself, a place of deep magic, of old agreements, of silence and secrets. Merlin did not explain further. One morning, before the sun had risen above the tree line, he led Arthur into the western woods. They traveled without escort, without fanfare, following paths no cart had ever taken, and streams that whispered in voices not quite human. The forest deepened, darkened. The canopy grew thick. Light broke through, only in thin golden slivers. Birds fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Eventually, they came upon a clearing, and there before them was a lake, still as glass, dark as night. Its surface shimmered, not with reflection, but with something deeper, like the water remembered dreams. Merlin told Arthur to wait. He stepped to the edge, and spoke no words Arthur could hear, but the effect was immediate. The water stirred, not with ripples, but with purpose, like a veil being drawn aside. From the center of the lake, a hand emerged. Not a body, just a hand. It rose slowly, draped in silver silk, the skin pale and luminous as moonlight. In its grip was a sword, longer than any Arthur had seen, yet impossibly balanced, gleaming with a light that did not come from the sky. Excalibur. It was not forged in any mortal smithy. Its edges had never dulled, and its runes etched along the fuller of the blade glowed faintly, pulsing like breath. The sword was offered, not thrown, and with it came a stillness so deep Arthur could feel the beat of his own heart in the earth beneath his feet. As Arthur stepped forward, the surface of the lake parted like silk, and from its depths rose a woman. She walked upon the water as though it was stone, clad in flowing garments that shimmered with scales and starlight. Her hair was dark and endless, her eyes like pools reflecting nothing, yet seeing all. This was the Lady of the Lake. No one knew her true name. Some called her Nimue, others Vivian, and still others did not dare name her at all. She was not of this world, but she moved through it, a guardian of the old ways, a being bound to the balance between realms, neither wholly benevolent nor cruel, only ancient, wise, and watchful. She offered the sword with no words, only a gesture, as if the sword itself had chosen, as if Arthur's soul had called for it before his mouth ever could. Arthur reached out. The moment his fingers touched the hilt, the world seemed to grow quieter. Not the silence of absence, but the hush of reverence. The lake stilled, the trees bowed, even the mist grew calm. Excalibur accepted its wielder. It was said that whoever bore that sword could not be defeated in battle, that its scabbard would keep wounds from bleeding, and that its blade could cut not only through flesh, but through illusion and deceit. Yet Merlin warned, the sword alone would not protect him. For all its power, he said, Excalibur reflects the one who carries it. It can be a light in dark times, or a shadow cast long over your reign. Wield it wisely. Arthur returned to Camelot with Excalibur at his side, but he spoke little of where he had gone, and though many saw the sword resting in its sheath of gold and leather, few knew its story. It was not a trophy, it was a trust. In time, Arthur had a special scabbard made to house it, carved with runes to honor the Lady of the Lake, and adorned with symbols of balance, scales, stars, and waves. He kept it near always, not just in war, but in court. For Excalibur was not only a weapon, it was a reminder that kings do not rule by strength alone, that authority must serve something greater than itself, that all power, even divine, must be tempered by purpose. And still the lady watched. She did not vanish with the mist. At times when Arthur rode alone through the woods, or stood quietly at the battlement, staring into the dusk, he would feel her presence like cool water, brushing against skin, like a thought just out of reach. It comforted him, and unsettled him in equal measure, for the lady had not come to bestow loyalty. She had come to bestow balance. It was her duty not to favor the king, but to ensure the old magic remained in harmony with the rising age of man. And Arthur, though born of prophecy, was not above her gaze. Years would pass. Many battles would be fought. Many tales spun by bards around firelight of Excalibur shining in the rain, of Arthur riding with the blade raised high, of victory snatched from the jaws of defeat. But always the sword seemed less a weapon and more a companion, one that aged with the king, learned with him, questioned him in the quiet of his soul. Some nights Arthur would awaken in his chambers, the sword still and silent at his side, yet he would dream of water, of a lake beyond the edge of the world, of a woman waiting in the mist, eyes unreadable, watching, waiting. And so the sword endured, as did the king. For as long as Excalibur remained with Arthur, the kingdom believed in its future. But swords, like stories, are never truly owned. They are held for a time, and when that time ends, they return to the water. The arrival of Guinevere, in the heart of spring, when the orchards were heavy with blossom, and the meadows shimmered with gold and green, there came a time when Camelot, though still young, began to hum with the rhythm of courtly life. Petitions were heard, treaties signed, tournaments held under bright flags that fluttered like birds in the breeze. And yet, even as his kingdom grew stronger by the day, Arthur carried within him a quiet emptiness he did not fully understand. He was a ruler of vision, a warrior of skill, a man of duty, but he was still young and alone. Those who served in his court began to speak of marriage. It was not only a matter of the heart, they argued, but of alliance. A queen would bring with her not only grace and companionship, but lands, soldiers, and loyalty from powerful families. She would also give the people a symbol of continuity, of a future that extended beyond the throne and into generations to come. Merlin, who rarely gave counsel on such matters, offered only one cryptic line: "She will come with the light of the dawn, and her name will carry both beauty and burden." Arthur pondered this, as he did all things Merlin said, but no woman came, not for a time. Then one summer morning, when the sun rose pale and clear over the eastern hills, a procession arrived at Camelot's gates. They came not in splendor, but in quiet dignity, riders cloaked in forest green, their armor polished but unadorned, bearing the seal of a distant kingdom, Camelot, a lush land of wooded valleys and ancient groves, ruled by King Leodegrance. At their head rode a young woman. She did not wear jewels. She did not need them. Her hair, the color of polished chestnut, fell in soft braids over her shoulders. Her eyes, cool and steady, reflected a depth of thought beyond her years. Her cloak, simple but finely made, whispered of a nobility that did not boast. And when she dismounted, there was a stillness in her every movement, like someone listening to a song no one else could hear. Her name was Guinevere. Arthur, watching from the high balcony, felt something shift inside him. Not the thunderclap of love at first sight. He was not a man prone to such fantasies, but something more subtle, a recognition, as if he had seen her once in a dream long forgotten, or glimpsed her silhouette in the mist on a childhood morning. She was not just beautiful. She was present, utterly, unwaveringly present. Guinevere had come not for courtship, but as an emissary. Her father, King Leodegrance, had long been a quiet ally of Arthur's rule, and had sent her to represent Camelot in a gathering of lords. It was on paper a matter of politics, but in practice it would prove to be something far more personal. During her stay at Camelot, Guinevere did not keep to the shadows of the ladies' court, nor did she seek attention at banquets. She walked the grounds with quiet curiosity, spoke with the servants, watched the knights train with a gaze that missed nothing. Arthur, intrigued, began to find reasons to speak with her. At first, their conversations were brief. Courteous exchanges in the garden, observations shared over the tiltyard, a passing remark in the corridor, a comment on a book in the library. But those small sparks soon kindled into something deeper. They spoke of duty, of what it meant to rule wisely, of how history could guide but not dictate, of the balance between strength and compassion. Guinevere challenged Arthur, not with defiance, but with honesty. She asked questions others were too timid to raise. Why certain laws had not been reformed, why some noble houses remained untouched by the expectations placed on others, why women who often held families and fiefs together were denied seats at council. Arthur did not bristle. He listened. She did not flatter, and he did not demand it. There was between them a mutual regard that grew quietly, steadily, like ivy along a stone wall. Yet even as affection bloomed, there was a shadow that lingered on the edge of Merlin's vision. He never forbade the match. He never spoke against it, but he watched, always watched, with a look that suggested knowledge deeper than love or law. Arthur, for his part, was not easily shaken. He began to court Guinevere with a seriousness that startled even his closest knights. There were no grand declarations, no songs sung beneath windows, only gestures, subtle, sincere. A horse chosen for her with care, bred for long rides across difficult terrain. A book of poetry from the Eastern Isles, translated by hand. A garden planted outside her chambers, with white lilies and sage. The flowers she'd once mentioned reminded her of home. When he finally asked for her hand, he did so not in a public hall, but in the stone cloister at twilight. The bells were ringing for vespers, the air soft with the scent of lavender and smoke. He simply said, "I do not ask you to serve a crown. I ask you to walk beside me. The kingdom is strong, but I am not whole without your counsel, without your calm, without you." Guinevere paused. Her silence stretched long enough for the evening star to rise above the towers. Then softly, "Yes." Word spread quickly. The court rejoiced and the people celebrated. All across Britain, bonfires were lit. Bells rang in the mountain abbeys and in the fishing villages by the sea. But beneath the celebration was a careful choreography of alliance. For with Guinevere came the favor of Camelot, and with it hundreds of mounted warriors, rich farmland, and control of key trade routes through the southern hills. Her father, King Leodegrance, presented Arthur with a wedding gift, a great circular table, carved of enchanted oak and gold, once given to Leodegrance by Uther Pendragon himself. Arthur, upon seeing it, recognized its shape, and in that moment he knew this would become the center of his court. It would be the round table, and so the union of Arthur and Guinevere became more than a marriage. It became a convergence of stories, of lineage, of destiny, of quiet dreams bound to duty. The wedding was held beneath the high vault of Camelot's great chapel. The walls were hung with banners from every realm, each one hand-stitched with a different emblem: dragons, lions, trees, suns and stars. Knights stood guard in formal silence, their armor polished, their swords peace-bound. Minstrels sang softly of old romances and wild flowers. Daisy, violet, rosemary lined the pews. Wine Gwynne wore no crown, only a garland of woven myrtle and lavender. Arthur wore no armor, only a simple robe of blue trimmed in silver. They spoke their vows, not in thunderous tones, but quietly, intimately, so that only the wind and the altar heard them. Afterward, there was a feast. It lasted 3 days and nights. But for all its laughter and joy, Arthur and Guinevere were not swept away in passion. Theirs was a marriage of layered meanings. Love, yes, but also alliance, pressure, hope, and watchfulness. For though they walked hand in hand, a great many eyes were always upon them. Some saw in Guinevere a beacon of grace. Others saw a threat, an intelligent queen with her own mind and perhaps her own secrets. Even among the knights, some whispered, not out of cruelty, but from the unease that always lingers when great changes begin to shift the earth beneath our feet. But Arthur trusted her, and she in turn offered her loyalty steadily, if not always easily. Together, they shaped Camelot's image. Arthur with his justice, Guinevere with her diplomacy. She softened the court, tempered tempers, resolved feuds, not with swords but with speech. She founded gardens, sponsored schools, and began a correspondence with scholars in distant lands. And in the center of it all, her presence remained constant. Not loud, not showy, but like a candle in a quiet room, unassuming and yet impossible to ignore. In time, the songs would remember her differently, as beauty, as betrayal, as tragedy. But before all that, she was simply Guinevere, the girl from Camelot who came to Camelot, not seeking a throne, but finding one she could share. And for a time, there was peace, Merlin's wisdom, and departure. For as long as Arthur had been king, and even before he bore the title, Merlin had been there. He had been the shadow in the torchlight, the whisper behind the veil, the old man who saw not only the road ahead, but the roads that never came to pass. He was not simply a magician, not merely a prophet. He was a presence, an ancient elusive thread woven into the fabric of Britain's story. The one who moved unseen through the woods, who spoke in riddles, who knew the names of stars and trees, and secrets buried in the bones of the earth. And yet, despite all his power and strangeness, Merlin never sought a throne or dominion. He asked for no land, wore no crown, and carried no sword. His authority came from something far older than kingdoms. It came from knowing. In the early years of Camelot, Merlin had been everywhere, quietly advising Arthur, behind the scenes of battle councils, speaking in hushed tones at the edge of crowded halls, slipping through libraries at midnight, trailing ink and candle smoke behind him. He was the king's closest counselor, though he rarely gave commands. Instead, he offered questions. Is a victory still just, if it sows the seeds of future tyranny? Will this law serve your people, or only their lords? Have you spoken to the ones whose names do not appear in the census? These were not questions designed to be answered quickly. They pressed on Arthur's mind, lingered for days, and shaped the king, not through doctrine, but through reflection. Merlin taught not by lecture, but by example. He listened more than he spoke. He studied old texts and wild birds with equal attention. He walked the woods alone, often barefoot, speaking with the wind as though it were a friend. Many in court found him unsettling. Others worshipped him as a sage. But Arthur, above all, respected him. And yet, even as the king grew into his power, and Camelot shone brighter with each passing year, Merlin began to withdraw. It was not abrupt, not a vanishing act. It was subtle, a quiet lessening of his presence. At first, he stopped attending certain meetings. Then he no longer joined the nightly feasts. His robes, once brushed clean by servants, grew more worn, and the lines beneath his eyes deepened, not with exhaustion, but with distance. Those closest to him began to notice. One by one, his few personal belongings disappeared from his chambers. Scrolls once kept at the foot of his bed were gone. The raven that had perched by his window, silent and unmoving, flew away one dawn and never returned. And still, Merlin said nothing. Arthur, concerned, called for him late one evening. They sat in the high tower overlooking Camelot. The stars were just beginning to pierce the dark, and the flickering of torches below mirrored constellations above. Arthur, ever direct, asked the question that had haunted him for months. "Are you leaving me?" Merlin did not answer at first. He traced a spiral in the frost on the stone windowsill and watched his breath curl into the cold. Then, softly, "Not leaving, returning." Arthur frowned. "To where?" Merlin smiled, tired but kind. "To the place where I am not needed, or perhaps where I am only needed." He gestured to the horizon. "Camelot is no longer a dream. It is a kingdom. It lives. It breathes. It chooses. I was always meant to guide you to this threshold, not beyond it." Arthur shook his head. "There is still more to be done. The world is not at peace." Merlin's gaze sharpened. "Not cruel, but clear. The world will never be at peace. Not fully, not forever. But you were never meant to chase perfection, only to build the frame that might hold it." Arthur's silence was answer enough. For a time, they said nothing. Only the wind spoke, brushing gently against the stone. Then Merlin stood. He placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder, fingers light as falling leaves. "I am not leaving because I have lost faith. I am leaving because I have faith." And with that, he stepped into the shadow of the stairwell and disappeared from the tower. In the days that followed, the court searched for him. His chambers were empty. The libraries where he had studied were still. The old oak grove where he often walked now stood undisturbed, the grass unbent. Rumors spread like ivy through the cracks of Camelot. Some said Merlin had returned to the realm of the Fae, that he had been a changeling all along, borrowed from another world and reclaimed at last. Others whispered that he had simply grown tired of men and their endless patterns of ambition and sorrow. But a few believed in another story, a gentler one, that Merlin had fallen in love. The name Nimue passed from lips to firelight in hushed tones. The Lady of the Lake, not merely a guardian of swords and secrets, but a woman of power in her own right. It was said she had ensnared Merlin not with sorcery, but with silence, that she had listened to him, truly listened, and in doing so, became the one place he could rest. Whatever the truth, Merlin was gone, and with his departure, something subtle shifted in Camelot. The king still ruled, the knights still served, the laws still stood, but the mystery, that deep hum of magic that had always pulsed beneath the stones, grew quieter. Arthur felt it most in the moments between duties, in the silence after a meeting, in the sound of rain on his window, in the flicker of candlelight when no wind stirred. There were no more riddles, no cryptic warnings, no hand to steady the scales just as they began to tip. He carried on because that is what kings must do. But now he carried more of the burden alone. Still, Merlin's lessons endured not as rules, but as echoes. In times of doubt, Arthur would remember his mentor's words. When lords pressed for war, ask not whether we can, but whether we should. When allies betrayed him, trust lost is rarely restored by vengeance. And when love and duty began to pull in opposite directions, sometimes the wisest path lies not in choosing, but in understanding the weight of both. Years later, knights would ask Arthur what had become of the old enchanter. He would only smile. "He is where he has always been," he would say, "in the space between what we know and what we have yet to learn." And perhaps that was the truth, that Merlin, though gone, was never truly absent. He lived in the spaces between logic and wonder, between courage and humility, between the firelight of a new idea and the first step taken to make it real. His wisdom had never been meant to last forever. It had been meant to awaken something, and in Arthur it had, the rise of Lancelot. He came not with trumpets, nor under banner or title. No procession preceded him. No herald spoke his name. He arrived one mist-laced morning, as the guards changed at the gates of Camelot, his horse weary from long travel, his armor plain and dusty, his eyes quiet but clear. Few took notice at first. He was another rider on the road, one of many who came to pledge service to the king, or to seek a place at the round table, or to simply catch a glimpse of the court, whose name now echoed across every corner of the land. But in time, all would know him, Lancelot du Lac, the greatest knight of his age. His story, like so many others born of both history and legend, begins not in Camelot, but far away, across the sea, beyond the wild coasts and the merchant harbors, in a land wrapped in mist and myth, the kingdom of Benoic. It was there, on a night when storm clouds split the sky in ribbons of lightning, that a boy was born to King Ban and Queen Elaine. The kingdom, though proud, was under siege. Enemies circled like wolves. Allies had grown silent, and Ban, loyal to Arthur, and one of the earliest to fight beside him, was losing ground as soldiers battered the gates, and fire leapt between rooftops. Ban and Elaine fled with the infant in their arms. But fate, ever watchful, would not allow the family to remain whole. On the edge of a forest, Ban fell, struck by an arrow, his lifeblood vanishing into the moss. Elaine, weeping, wrapped her child in cloth and placed him by the water, whispering a final prayer to the old gods before darkness claimed her. And then a miracle. From the lake beside the trees, a figure rose, draped in robes of mist and moonlight. The lady of the lake took the child into her arms. Whether she had heard the queen's cry, or had already known what must come, no one could say. But the boy was not lost. She carried him into her realm, into the hidden world beneath the water, where time flowed like a river through dream. He was raised in her care, in a place no map could find. There, beneath willow canopies and crystal pools, Lancelot learned not only the art of combat, but the discipline of mind and spirit. He was taught to fight, but also to think, to hold a sword with strength, but only after learning when not to draw it. He learned languages older than speech, watched the stars with a scholar's patience, and listened to stories carved into stone long before the age of kings. He was shaped not for war, for service. The Lady of the Lake, though enigmatic, was not unkind. She nurtured him with silence and presence, and when he was grown, she gave him a sword of her own, not Excalibur, but a blade forged in secret fires, inscribed with a single word, faith. Then she spoke, for perhaps the first time in years, "You must go to Arthur." And so Lancelot crossed the sea. When he arrived at Camelot, no one knew his name. He wore no crest, claimed no bloodline, offered no tale of hardship or heroism. He simply asked to train among the squires. But the knights noticed him quickly, not for his boast, but for his focus. He sparred with restraint. He listened before he spoke. And when he was mocked by other squires for his quiet demeanor and foreign accent, he answered not with retorts, but with humility. It was Sir Gawain who first recognized his skill. One afternoon, after watching Lancelot best 3 knights in practice without once drawing blood, Gawain approached Arthur and said, "We are in the presence of someone unlike the rest. Not just another sword, but a soul shaped by something higher." Arthur summoned him, asked his name. Lancelot bowed his head. "I am of the lake," he said simply. "I come to serve." From that moment forward, he rose quickly. Not because he sought it, but because he earned it. He proved himself in jousts, yes, but also in diplomacy. He fought with fire, but carried compassion, like a second blade. He rode out against raiders in the north, returned with captured villages, safe behind him, and gave away his reward to the widows who'd lost their homes. In battle, he was nearly unmatched. He moved as though the sword were part of him, not wielded, but inhabited. There were whispers that no man had ever unhorsed him in a fair joust, that his armor bore no rust, that he slept with one hand always open, never clenched. Yet for all his strength, there was a gentleness to him. He visited the infirmary often, spoke to children with patience, listened when others would only lecture, and it was perhaps this quality, the quiet tension between power and grace, that first caught the eye of Queen Guinevere. Their early exchanges were brief, courteous, fleeting, but as seasons turned, something began to pass between them. A glance held a moment too long, a shared silence in the garden, a question asked without words and answered without sound. They never strayed, not at first. Both knew their places. Both understood duty, but in the deep chambers of their hearts, something stirred, something unspoken, but undeniable. Still, Lancelot never allowed it to cloud his service. If anything, he redoubled his efforts. He was often the first to ride out on missions of justice, the first to step forward when a knight was needed to defend the innocent, the first to place himself between the court and danger. He was given a seat at the Round Table, one of the few knights whose name was carved without hesitation. Even Arthur, who had come to trust Lancelot more than most, began to refer to him in council, not only as a warrior, but as a compass. What would Lancelot do became a quiet refrain among the court. And yet, for all his achievements, Lancelot never claimed a title. He declined land, turned down offers of marriage from noble houses, and kept his chambers sparse. No tapestries, no ornaments, just a single candle and a view of the hills. He remained devoted to Arthur, to the code, to something higher than himself. But devotion, like all things, carries weight, and in silence it deepens. As the years passed, Lancelot became a figure of legend, his name sung by bards across the countryside, painted in murals across the isles, etched into the memories of those who saw him ride. And still the unspoken grew. Between him and Guinevere, there remained only what was not done, what was never said, a thread pulled tight and left unbroken for now. Because some stories bloom slowly, some rise in silence, and some, no matter how noble, carry within them the seed of sorrow. But for this time, these golden years of Camelot, Lancelot stood tall, not as a rival, not as a traitor, but as a beacon, a knight of the lake, a man of honor, and perhaps a soul destined to carry both glory and grief in equal measure. The trials of the knights. Though the tales most often told sing of Arthur, Lancelot, and the Holy Grail, there were many others whose stories wove quietly into the grand tapestry of Camelot. Stories not of grand wars or kingship, but of choices made far from court, in forests and fields, in quiet cottages and crumbling ruins. These were the trials of the knights, not the tests of arms in tournaments, or the rites of passage for young squires, but the inner trials, the subtle moments in which courage was not measured in blade or shield, but in patience, kindness, and truth. For Camelot, though noble, was never without flaws, and Arthur, in his wisdom, knew that power untested soon grew proud. So he sent his knights beyond the castle walls, not only to fight, but to learn, to protect the innocent, to confront injustice, and to seek something more lasting than victory. These are a few of their stories. The trial of Sir Gareth and the Silent Village. Sir Gareth, the youngest brother of Gawain, once rode north, alone, through a valley where no birds sang, and the trees leaned inward, as if listening for something that never came. He came upon a village, strangely still. The houses stood, the wells were full, but there were no people, no smoke, no laughter, only silence. He dismounted, left his sword on his horse, and stepped gently between the cottages. In the center of the village, he found a woman, sitting by an extinguished hearth, her eyes distant. She told him, in a voice cracked by wind and sorrow, that the village had once been blessed with music. A single flutist, a boy no older than 10, had played each evening by the well, and in doing so, had kept away the darkness that crept from the woods. But one day, the boy had stopped. Gareth asked why. The woman would only point to the forest. Without hesitation, Gareth entered the trees. He wandered until night fell, until the moon rose high and pale. And there, sitting on a stump, beneath a canopy of branches, he found the boy. The flute lay broken beside him. The boy looked up and said only, "They stopped listening." and Gareth understood. He knelt before the child and listened, not to music, but to silence. He stayed there until dawn, saying nothing, only listening, and slowly the boy began to hum a low, trembling tune. Gareth repaired the flute himself with thread from his saddlebag, and the boy returned to the mound. Visage. That night, as the melody filled the air once more, the villagers emerged one by one, silent, ashamed, and then weeping. No sword had been drawn, no enemy had been slain, but a trial had been passed. The trial of Sir Ector and the Wandering Hearth. Sir Ector, Arthur's foster father, and one of the oldest knights of the Round Table, once took it upon himself to visit the outermost borders of the realm, where the laws of Camelot reached only in parchment, not in practice. He rode for weeks until he found a homestead built of driftwood and stone, where a woman tended sheep alone with her 3 sons. Her roof leaked, her hearth was cracked. But when she saw the knight, she did not bow. She only asked, "Will you eat with us?" Ector accepted. The meal was thin, stewed barley, and wild herbs, but he ate gratefully. Later, as they sat by the fire, the woman spoke of the taxes demanded by a local baron who claimed lordship over land he never tilled. She said he had taken their cart, their goats, and once even her eldest son to serve in his private guard. Ector stood at once, vowing to bring justice to the baron, but the woman shook her head. "No," she said, "not with steel, with something stronger." She handed him a pot of clay and asked him to return in 1 week. Puzzled, Ector did as asked. He returned to Camelot, filled the pot with seeds from the royal gardens, mint, lavender, thyme, and sage, and brought it back. By then, the hearth had been rebuilt. The baron had been invited to dinner and seated at that same humble table, sharing bread and herbs. He listened for the first time to the stories of those he had wronged. The pot was placed at the center, and something shifted. The baron lowered taxes, sent his guards to build a new roof, and returned the goats. Later, when asked what changed him, the baron replied, "I was fed not by food, but by grace." Ector never told the tale as his own. He said only, "The strongest trials are not fought, but faced." The trial of Sir Yvain and the beast beneath the hill. Far to the west, where the hills roll like waves and mists cling tightly to the earth, Sir Yvain followed a rumor. They said a beast lived beneath a barrow mound, that it devoured cattle and drank from the river at night, that no man who entered the hollow returned. Yvain rode alone. He found the mound, waited by the entrance until dusk, and then descended into the dark. The tunnel was long, sloped, and strangely warm. The deeper he went, the more the air seemed to pulse like a heartbeat trapped in stone. At last, he came to a cavern lit by a single shaft of moonlight, and there, curled beneath the stone, was the beast. But it was no monster. It was old, ancient. Its scales were dulled, its wings torn, its breath shallow. It looked at Yvain with weary eyes, and spoke not in words but in thought. "Do you come to end me?" Yvain lowered his sword. "No," he said, "only to understand." And so he listened. The creature had once protected the valley long before men came, but over time its name had been forgotten, its cave stolen, its food hunted. It had lashed out, not from malice, but from despair. Yvain made a pact. He brought offerings, taught the villagers its story, named the hills after the guardian they had once feared. And in time, the beast passed, quietly in sleep, not slain, but seen. The trial of Sir Bors and the unanswered cry. Sir Bors, known for his sternness and clarity of purpose, once found himself at a crossroads quite literally. He had been riding to aid a besieged town, when at the edge of a forest path, he heard 2 cries. One came from the south, a woman screaming for help as brigands closed in. The other, from the north, a child, drowning in a river. He had only moments to choose. He turned north. He dove into the river, found the child, pulled her from the current, and held her until she could breathe again. When he returned to the south, the brigands were gone. The woman lay still. For weeks, Bors was haunted by that moment, the choice, the consequence. But when he returned to Camelot, The child's mother approached him. She bowed low and said, "You saved my daughter. One day she will grow and heal others. You saved not one life, but many yet to come." Still, Bors never forgot the weight of the choice. And for the rest of his life, he carried both the joy of the life saved and the sorrow of the one he could not. Too was a trial. In these stories, quiet, strange, and seldom sung, lay the soul of the Round Table. For while the world often praised the flash of steel, it was in these hidden places, these moments of silent decision and unseen courage, that the true heart of knighthood revealed itself. Not all trials ended in triumph. Not all quests brought glory. But each one, each small act of listening, of restraint, of care, kept the dream of Camelot alive. And in the hush of dusk, when the halls grew quiet and the candles burned low, the knights would remember not only the battles fought in daylight, but the choices made in shadows. For it is not only dragons that test us. Sometimes it is silence. Sometimes it is mercy. Sometimes it is simply doing what is right, even when no song will ever be sung for it. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It began on a winter's night in the heart of Camelot. The great hall was filled with laughter, warmth, and candlelight. Boughs of holly adorned the pillars. The scent of pine, roast fowl, and mulled wine hung in the air. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the Round Table gleamed with polished wood, its many seats filled by knights dressed in their winter finery. It was New Year's Day, a time of feasting, of games and riddles, of merriment and tales. A harpist played softly in the corner, and the court jesters spun about the hall in brightly colored cloaks. King Arthur himself sat at the head of the celebration, eyes alight with the energy of the season. The Queen, serene beside him, smiled gently at the joyful noise. All was well, all was safe, and then the doors opened. No knock, no call for entry, just the creak of oak, the hush of sudden silence, and the rush of cold air that slipped like ice through the chamber. A figure stood in the doorway. A man, though not a man as any there had seen. He was tall, towering, broad-shouldered, and impossibly still. His skin, his hair, his garments, all of him were green. Not merely dressed in green, but the very color of it. Leaf green, bark green, moss, and emerald. His hair fell in long braids like vines. His beard curled like ivy. His eyes shone like dew. Even his horse, a massive steed, clad in a green saddle with braided reins, was the color of new grass in spring. And in one hand, the stranger held a great axe, its blade as wide as a man's chest, glinting silver. In the other, he held a branch of holly, fresh, bright, and unmistakably alive, even in the dead of winter. He rode forward with perfect calm, the hooves of his horse sounding loud in the stunned stillness. Then he spoke, his voice low, clear, and oddly pleasant. "Is this the court of the great King Arthur? Is this the hall where courage and honor are said to live?" No one answered. He smiled. "I come in peace. I come not with battle, but with a game." At last, Arthur rose. He welcomed the visitor with courtesy, though with no small measure of wariness. "A game?" he asked. The Green Knight nodded. "A Christmas challenge, a simple exchange. I offer this axe. Let any knight here strike me a single blow, any blow he wishes, and I shall give him the axe as a gift. But in 1 year's time, I shall return the blow in kind." Murmurs spread across the hall. Was it a trick? A test? Was the figure even human? The knights looked to each other, uncertain. Then one stepped forward. Sir Gawain, nephew to the king, honorable, loyal, quiet, but never timid. He bowed to Arthur, asking for the right to accept the challenge. Arthur, moved by both pride and apprehension, granted it. Gawain took the axe. The Green Knight dismounted, knelt without hesitation, and bent his head forward, exposing his neck. "Strike," he said simply. Gawain, still uncertain, swung the axe cleanly and true. The blade fell. The head rolled. Gasps echoed through the hall. And then the Green Knight stood up. Without a word of pain, he reached down, picked up his severed head, and held it before him like a lantern. The eyes blinked, the mouth smiled. 1 year hence, the head spoke at the green chapel. "Seek me, Gawain, and receive what you have given." Then, with a whinny and a gust of wind, he turned and rode out, his horse's hooves echoing long after the door had closed behind him. The seasons passed. Spring warmed the hills. Summer gilded the rivers. Autumn scattered gold through the forests. And as winter approached again, Gawain prepared to fulfill his promise. He rode out from Camelot in quiet ceremony. His armor was polished. His shield bore the image of a pentangle, 5-pointed and interlocked, symbolizing the virtues he sought to embody: generosity, fellowship, purity, courtesy, and compassion. He carried no escort. This trial, he knew, was his alone. Gawain rode for many days through rain and snow, across high moors and into ancient woods. He met wild beasts, sought shelter in abbeys and caves, crossed paths with hermits, and prayed often, and always he sought the green chapel, but no one knew the way. One bitter evening, as frost crept along his cloak, and hunger wore on his strength, he came upon a castle, tucked deep within a snow-covered valley, its walls high, its gates open, a fire burning in the hall. He was welcomed by its lord, Bertilac, a large, jovial man with a booming laugh and a hunting hound that never left his side. The lady of the castle, graceful, sharp-eyed, and elegant, welcomed him as well, offering rest, food, and warmth. Gawain accepted, grateful beyond words. There he stayed for 3 days. Each morning the lord rode out to hunt. Each morning Gawain remained in the castle, and each morning the lady visited him. She came softly, with flattery and gifts of praise. She asked questions, teased, and tempted, testing Gawain's resolve, not with threat, but with charm. On the first day, she offered a kiss. He accepted reluctantly. On the second day, another. He gave it back uneasily. On the third day, she offered him a belt, green and gold, said to protect its wearer from all harm. At first, he refused, but then he accepted. He did not tell her husband. When Bertilac returned each evening from the hunt, he and Gawain exchanged the fruits of their days. Gawain gave the kisses, as was their playful agreement, but not the belt. He kept it hidden, tied close beneath his armor. And then the time came. Bertilac smiled. "Just beyond the hill lies the green chapel. There you'll find the one you seek." Gawain thanked him and departed. He found the chapel beneath a low, mossy hill, less a building than a hollow in the earth, overgrown and whispering with wind. There the Green Knight waited, axe in hand. Gawain knelt. He closed his eyes. He bared his neck. The first swing stopped short. The Green Knight laughed. "Are you so eager for death?" Gawain said nothing. The second swing grazed his neck, drawing a drop of blood. The third never came. The Green Knight lowered the axe and spoke. "You have kept your promise, brave Gawain, but not all of it." He revealed himself to be none other than Bertilac, the lord of the castle, transformed by the magic of Morgan le Fay, Arthur's half-sister, who had sought to test the court's honor through enchantment. The kisses, the game, the belt, it had all been part of the trial. Gawain, shamed, removed the belt and cast it to the ground. "I have failed," he said. "I allowed fear to make me false." But the Green Knight shook his head. "You are the most honest man I've met, for even in error you came. You faced the truth. That is more than most." Gawain returned to Camelot in silence. He wore the green belt, not in pride, but in memory of humility, of fallibility, of the quiet strength it takes to face one's own flaws. And when Arthur heard the tale, he did not mock or mourn. He took a strip of green silk and tied it around his own waist. "Let it be a symbol," he said, "not of shame, but of striving." And so the knights of the Round Table all wore green sashes from that day forth, not as trophies, but as reminders that courage is not perfection. Courage is showing up, even when you are afraid, even when you have faltered, even when the axe still waits. The quest for the Holy Grail begins. It began with a silence. not the kind brought by nightfall or the hush before a storm. This silence was different. It was the kind that enters a room and lingers, not because it was invited, but because it was meant to be heard. The knights of the Round Table were gathered, as they often were, for a midsummer feast. The long windows of Camelot's great hall stood open to the hills. The breeze was warm, carrying the scent of heather and honeysuckle. Flags stirred gently. The court was at peace. Laughter rose and fell like birdsong. But then, just before the bread was broken, the candles flickered. One by one, the flames bent sideways, not from wind, but from something else, something unseen, something watching. And then, without warning or herald, a brilliance entered the hall. It was not light, not in the way fire is light. It was presence, a glow that moved but did not shine, a radiance that needed no source. At the very center of the room, without footsteps, without sound, there appeared a vision, a cup, simple, unadorned, no jewels, no gold, a plain chalice suspended in air, surrounded by a veil of pale silver mist. The knights rose as one. None spoke, none dared. Even Arthur stood, his breath caught in his chest, as though he were not witnessing an object, but a moment long foretold. The Grail, the one spoken of only in whispers, the one said to hold the blood of Christ, or the tears of the earth, or the last breath of a dying god. Its stories differed, but its meaning was always the same. Purity, wholeness, truth, and just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The mist withdrew, the light faded, the silence remained. When breath returned to the room, it came like the first breath after drowning, sudden, gasping, and filled with awe. It was Sir Percival who spoke first. He was young, new to the Round Table, but wide-eyed and gentle of heart. What was it? Arthur looked toward Merlin's old seat, still empty, and answered quietly. The Grail. There was no debate, no question. Every man in the hall had felt it deeply, unmistakably. It had not been an illusion. It had called to something within them. The knights stood in silence until Sir Gawain stepped forward. I swear by the code we hold, I will find it. I will seek the Grail until it is found, or I am no more. Other voices rose one by one, not in clamour, but in certainty. Sir Bors, Sir Ector, Sir Percival, Sir Lionel, Sir Bedivere. Each swore not to pursue glory, but to walk the path of the Grail, not for fame, but for truth. Then came Lancelot. He rose slowly, eyes downcast. He did not speak easily. If the Grail is to be found by those pure of heart, then I must first find the path to purity. He looked not at Arthur, but at the space between, and if I cannot find it, I will not return. Arthur said nothing. He only nodded once and stepped aside, allowing them to pass. Within days, the Round Table stood half empty. The fields outside Camelot filled with banners and horses as knights rode out into the unknown, some alone, others in pairs, none knowing where the journey would take them. No map could guide them, for the Grail was not hidden in stone or locked in a tower. It was veiled by the soul's own shadow. The journey would test more than strength. It would test being. Some knights rode west into the forests of Wales, where the trees were said to whisper the names of those who listened. Others sailed across misty seas to crumbling islands where old gods still lingered in the caves and dreams. They sought not just the Grail, but the self that was worthy of holding it. And in their absence, Camelot changed. The halls grew quieter, the laughter softer, the feasts smaller. Guinevere walked the gardens alone more often, her hands trailing the tops of lavender blooms. Arthur spent long hours in the council chamber, staring not at parchment, but at the empty chairs. It was not sadness, not exactly. It was the weight of something larger than a kingdom. Arthur knew the quest could not be refused. It had not come from him. It had come from within them, from the part of every knight that knew honor must evolve, that deeds of steel could only carry a soul so far, that something greater, something timeless awaited in the unseen. And yet, as the weeks passed, No messages came. No birds with news. No riders returning in triumph. Only silence. Until one day, a monk from a far-off abbey arrived, bringing with him a tale. He had seen a knight pass through his cloister, barefoot, cloaked in rags, fasting. The knight asked for no food, only a moment of prayer. Before he left, he said one thing: the Grail cannot be chased. It must be lived. The monk did not catch his name, but Arthur knew it was Galahad, a new knight, a quiet one, said to be born of Lancelot, and a lady cloistered far from court. He had appeared in Camelot only briefly, had taken a seat at the round table, and then had vanished without a sound. Many believed Galahad was different, not just good, but uncorrupted, not just brave, but untainted. Some said he had no fear, others said he had no doubt. But perhaps he simply had no division between what he believed and what he did. And so the quest continued, across mountains, through ruins, into deserts, and cities lost to time. Each knight faced their own reflection, saw themselves not as the world saw them, but as they truly were. Sir Bors was tempted with power and turned away. Sir Percival found a wounded lion and chose to heal it, though it cost him months of travel. Sir Gawain met a woman in a cave who asked no questions, only listened, and in that silence he wept. For many, the Grail remained out of reach, not because they failed, but because they learned that seeking it was the true journey. And yet, it is said that one knight did find it. In a ruined chapel lit by starlight and dappled moss, Galahad knelt before an altar upon which the Grail rested. He did not take it, he did not lift it, he simply saw it. And in that moment, it is said, he understood all things. But that part of the tale is still to come. For now, the quest had only just begun. And in Camelot, the wind shifted, not with sorrow, not yet, but with knowing that something sacred had moved through them, and that nothing, not even a kingdom, would ever be the same. Galahad the Pure. Before his name was known to the world, before his feet ever touched the polished floors of Camelot, Galahad lived in silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence. He had been raised in a monastery, far from courtly life, far from banners and battles, in a stone cloister, nestled among the hills of a forgotten valley, where birdsong echoed, through arched corridors, and the scent of myrrh and parchment filled the air. The monks who raised him did not speak often of his parentage. They only said he had been delivered into their care as an infant, swaddled in silk, and left at the wooden gates beneath a crescent moon. But even then, they knew he was different. He did not cry. He did not startle at thunder. As he grew, he seemed to listen to things others could not hear, the rustle of leaves as language, the shifting of the stars as song. He was not distant, he was not strange, he was still. The brothers taught him to read the ancient texts, to till the soil, to mend walls and wounds alike. He learned humility, prayer, temperance. He knew no courtly titles, no war stories, no hunting horns or feasting tables, only balance, only quiet, only truth. But destiny is not denied by distance. And when he was of age, the abbot gave him a sword, not gleaming, but plain. No jewels, no enchantments, just a simple weapon with a cross-shaped hilt and the weight of purpose in its blade. This was left with you, the abbot said. One day you will know why. And so Galahad left. He arrived in Camelot at dusk. His cloak was travel-worn, his boots stained with dust. He bore no sigil, no retinue. And yet the guards at the gate stepped aside without question. Something in their bones recognized him before their minds could. He walked through the winding halls with quiet awe, his eyes absorbing every carving, every column, every detail of the kingdom he had never seen, but somehow already understood. He came at a time when the round table was half empty. Many knights had already ridden out in search of the Grail. Some had returned, most had not. And yet, when Galahad stood in the great hall, the air seemed to shift. Arthur noticed it at once. The boy, though no longer a child, carried himself without pride. yet without fear. His posture was upright, but not rigid. His expression calm, but not vacant. He seemed whole. The court watched as Galahad approached the table, and then something extraordinary happened. At the far end of the hall stood the Siege Perilous, a seat left forever empty, carved long ago by Merlin himself, reserved for the one knight who was pure of heart and destined to complete the Grail quest. Any other who sat there would perish. For years it had remained untouched. Galahad did not hesitate. He walked to the Siege Perilous, turned to the gathered knights, and spoke only once. "If this is not mine, let it take me." He sat, and nothing happened. No wind, no flame, no death, only stillness. Arthur stood slowly. Guinevere covered her mouth in wonder. The knights looked to one another in silence. The seat had accepted him. The prophecy was fulfilled. Though Galahad had only just arrived, his time in Camelot would be brief. He was not a knight of tournaments. He did not linger for songs or stories. He declined feasts, offered thanks for hospitality, and walked often alone by the gardens or the chapel, pausing beneath old trees or at the edge of the river. He did not seek companionship, yet all who spoke with him felt known. Lancelot, who had only once locked eyes with the boy he now realized was his son, could not speak. He had once walked a difficult path, proud, scarred, conflicted. But Galahad was not a reflection of him. He was something beyond. Lancelot wept alone that night, not from sorrow, but from something deeper, something like grace. Galahad did not speak of his parentage. He asked no questions. He requested no honors. And then on the 7th morning after his arrival, he approached Arthur before sunrise. "The Grail calls," he said simply. "I must go." Arthur, though reluctant, did not argue. He gave the young knight provisions, a blessing, and his deepest hope. Then Galahad departed, riding east, beneath a sky streaked with pale pink and gold. His journey was not like that of the other knights. He did not travel by roads. He did not seek inns or abbeys. He rode where his heart pulled him through misted forests, over still rivers, along cliffs where seabirds wheeled and cried. The world, as he passed through it, seemed to respond. Thorns bent aside, rain slowed. Wolves watched from the brush but did not chase. He came upon places forgotten, ruined temples, hollow hills, silent groves where time did not pass. And in each place he was tested, not with blades, not with monsters, but with moments of choice. He came upon a child alone in a field, sobbing over a broken staff. He stopped, sat beside her, and showed her how to mend the wood with twine and patience. He found a village torn by dispute over a dried-up well. He listened to both sides, not as judge, but as presence. And when he left, they found water not beneath the earth, but within themselves. He did not preach, he did not boast, he was. And all the while the Grail drew closer. At last, in a valley no map held, Galahad reached the edge of a forest that trembled with light. There, beneath the roots of an ancient oak, lay a chapel, broken and vine-covered, with stained glass windows barely clinging to their frames, and an altar covered in dust and fallen leaves. He entered without fear. The air inside was different, not heavy, not cold, but clear. He stepped forward, and there upon the altar rested the Holy Grail. It was not grand, it was not glowing, it was simple, an earthen cup shaped by hand, unpolished and unadorned. But the moment his eyes met it, Galahad understood. He fell to his knees, not in worship, but in unity. He did not take it. He did not touch it. He became it. In that moment all things fell away. Name, body, time, kingdom. There was no hunger, no fear, no separation, only peace. And then, as gently as snow falling on water, he was gone. Some say he was taken by angels. Others say his spirit entered the Grail itself. But none saw him again. And yet the flowers that grew beside the chapel bloomed year-round. The stream that ran past it never dried. And those who came in quiet faith felt a presence, kind, watchful, and complete. Back in Camelot, word came in fragments. A monk's vision, a passing dream, a letter found in a tree, written in a hand none could trace. But all told the same story, that the purest knight had found the holiest thing, and that he had not returned. Not because he was lost, but because he had arrived. Arthur held a feast in his honor, but it was not loud. There were no tournaments, no speeches. Only a single chair left empty at the round table, marked with a green sash and a branch of olive. And when the hall fell quiet that night, Arthur said only, "He was what we are meant to be, and because of him we may yet become it. The Grail is found." Long after Galahad had vanished into legend, when the world had begun to forget the paths he walked, two knights still rode the quiet road, slowly, steadily, seeking what most believed was no longer meant to be found. Sir Percival and Sir Bors. They had parted from one another many months before, each taking a different route through the shadowed corners of the kingdom. Their journeys had changed them, not by what they had found, but by what they had surrendered. Gone were the gleaming helms and polished cloaks they had once worn in Camelot. Gone, too, was the need for recognition or song. They no longer rode for honor, nor for proof, nor even for certainty. They rode because something within them whispered still, "Go on." Sir Bors, the elder of the two, had always been steadfast. He bore the weight of the Round Table with grace, carrying its traditions, its burdens, and its hopes. But now the lines upon his face were deeper. His eyes had softened, not dulled, but widened, as if he had come to understand that truth was not a matter of conquest, but of patience. Sir Percival, once the youngest of knights, had grown in silence. He had once asked endless questions, hungered for meaning. But the farther he rode, the fewer words he needed. The world spoke through wind and water now, and he had learned to listen. Their paths converged again in the ruins of an old stone chapel, deep within a forest that had grown wild and solemn. They recognized each other, not by armor or banner, but by stillness, a shared calm, like the hush before dawn. No words were needed. They embraced, and together they continued. For 7 days and nights, they followed a stream that flowed uphill, defying all sense, and yet moving steadily through root and rock, humming with a strange, holy melody. On the 8th day, they found themselves in a high valley wrapped in mist. The trees here grew in a perfect circle, their trunks silver and smooth. Birds did not sing. No animals stirred. The air was not cold, but untouched, like the breath of a world that had never known war. And in the very center of that quiet stood a sanctuary, not a castle, not a church. It was carved into the hillside itself, shaped by wind and time, with arched stone doorways and a dome of moss and marble. Its windows were made not of glass, but of thin crystal that shimmered faintly with inner light. They dismounted without speaking, left their swords on the grass, and entered. Inside the chamber was small and round, its ceiling lost in shadows. An altar stood in the center, simple, worn, unadorned, and resting atop it was a cup, not suspended in air, not glowing, just there, plain, earthen-colored, its surface cracked and pitted with age, its shape familiar, humble, and impossibly still. The Grail. Percival fell to his knees. He felt no triumph, no victory, only presence, as if every step of his life had been leading here, not to discover, but to return. He did not reach for it. Instead, he bowed his head, his breath slowed, and tears, warm and quiet, slipped down his cheeks, not from sorrow, but from the unbearable brightness of the moment. Beside him, Bors stood still. His hand rested lightly on Percival's shoulder. He did not cry, but his eyes held the glint of something unspoken. For a long time they remained there. There was no sound, no vision, no voice from the heavens, only stillness. And yet in that stillness, they knew everything had changed. In that quiet place, something opened within them. Not knowledge in the way books offer it, but knowing, deep, gentle, and complete. They saw not the future nor the past, but the truth that had always been present beneath both. The Grail was not power, not salvation, not a prize for the worthy. It was reminder that the sacred lives within the simple, that the divine resides not above, but among, that the greatest truths are not taken, only received by those who come without demand. It is said that as they knelt there, the Grail pulsed once with light, barely perceptible, like the final sigh of a candle before it goes out. And then it was gone, not vanished, not stolen, simply gone. Its work was done. Percival remained behind. His heart, once full of questions, now felt light and still. He asked for no return, no song, no farewell. He chose to stay in the valley among the trees and the stream that flowed uphill, to live not as a knight, but as a keeper of quiet. He built no house, planted no flags. He walked the circle of the trees each morning, and in time became part of the forest's breath. Bors returned to Camelot alone, not with stories of fire and miracles, not with scrolls or relics, but with silence. And in that silence, the court listened more than ever before. Arthur, hearing of what had passed, did not ask where the Grail had gone. He only asked one question: "Are we better now than when we began?" Bors smiled, not with certainty, but with peace. "We are changed." The Grail was never seen again, but its echo lingered, in the way a knight offered food to a traveler without asking his name, in the way the court paused each day before issuing judgment, in the way Arthur sat at the round table, not as a king above, but as a man among. No songs were sung for Percival in his lifetime. His name was not carved in gold. But in the hills, children grew up hearing stories of a quiet man who walked the woods barefoot, who spoke kindly to animals, and who listened more than he spoke. Some say he lived to old age. Others say he faded into the trees. But all agreed he had seen the Grail. And once seen, nothing could ever be the same. The betrayal of Guinevere and Lancelot. There are moments in every golden age when the first shadow falls, not loudly, not with thunder, but softly, like a single leaf falling before autumn, like a breath caught before the words are spoken. In Camelot, that shadow came not from war, nor from betrayal of state, but from a quiet human ache, the ache of love withheld, of longing unspoken, of hearts that had for too long been careful. The love between Guinevere and Lancelot did not begin in fire. It began in restraint. For years they had walked the corridors of the court in silence, shoulders passing just out of reach, eyes meeting and looking away, words left unfinished in doorways and gardens. It was not the love of fairy tales, or even of courtly poems. It was deeper, woven into routine, bound by mutual respect and sorrow and timing. Lancelot had always loved her. That truth lived in the corners of his gaze, in the way he bowed his head slightly more deeply when she passed, in the way he stood a half-step behind her in court, as if protecting her even in stillness. And Guinevere, queen, wife, sovereign, had loved him in silence. She carried it, not as a wound, but as a hidden warmth, something folded deep within her, beneath the crown, beneath the duty, beneath the weight of being loved by a kingdom, but understood by only one, and for many years, that was enough. They both believed in honor. They both believed in Arthur. They both believed that love did not always ask for itself. But belief, however noble, is a fragile thing when tested by time. When the Grail quest ended and the knights returned, older, quieter, fewer in number, something in Camelot changed. The court still gathered, the banners still flew, but laughter had grown softer. There was a space now between what had been hoped and what had been found. Arthur too had changed, not in bitterness, but in gravity. He spent long hours alone in council chambers, poring over treaties, ruling with clarity, but with a kind of growing distance, as if his thoughts were no longer tethered fully to the world. Guinevere, once the center of celebration and diplomacy, felt that distance grow. She did not resent it. She understood it, but she began to walk alone more often. And it was in one of these walks beneath the blooming apple trees near the outer wall that Lancelot found her, not by design, but by the quiet accident of fate. He saw her standing beneath a tree, her hand resting on the trunk, eyes closed. He said nothing at first. She turned, And in that single moment of recognition, of knowing, of shared fatigue, they could no longer pretend. No declarations were made, no vows broken in speech. It was a glance, a breath, a closeness long denied, now present. And still they resisted. For weeks afterward they avoided one another. Lancelot rode patrols farther from court. Guinevere kept to her chambers, but the ache remained. One night during a festival, when the halls were filled with music and lanterns swayed like stars, they found themselves alone in the cloister garden. The candles flickered in the breeze. The ivy curled in silver loops across the stone. They spoke only once. "I am not afraid," Guinevere whispered, "but I am tired of pretending I do not feel." Lancelot's voice shook. "I would give you all of me, but I will never take what is not mine." She reached for his hand. "Then don't take, let it be given." And so it began. A love not loud, but true. Not wild, but achingly careful. They met in secret behind chapel walls, in shadowed corners of the library, in the old tower where vines grew through the stones, and time seemed to hold its breath. They never spoke of the future. They did not make plans. They loved as if it were both gift and punishment, as if every moment might be the last. And though they kept their secret well, the air around them changed. Some knights sensed it, noticed a new softness in Lancelot's voice when he spoke her name, noticed how Guinevere turned her face when he entered a room, and one of those knights was watching. Mordred, Arthur's son, by blood, but never by affection. Born of confusion, raised in resentment, Mordred had always felt like an outsider in Camelot. Too sharp, too cold. He read rooms as weapons, and silence as strategy. He did not accuse them openly. He waited, and one night he followed. It happened in the old chapel. Lancelot and Guinevere, kneeling by candlelight, hands clasped, not in passion, but in grief. Grief for what they had become, for what they could not undo. Mordred saw enough. He did not wait for more. The next morning he went to Arthur. He spoke with calm, with control. He laid out his case with the precision of a blade. Arthur said nothing, not at first. The room emptied, and then he sat alone for a very long time. He did not summon his knights. He did not send for Guinevere. He simply sat. Because there are betrayals that are not crimes of the flesh, but wounds of the soul. When he finally acted, he did so without rage. Guinevere was placed under guard. Lancelot, warned by a whisper from an ally, fled the city by night. He did not resist. He left without sword or defense. He left because he knew he had taken too much for too long. And then Camelot split. Some knights, those loyal to Arthur, demanded punishment, justice, restoration. Others, those loyal to Lancelot, spoke of mercy, of love, of the flaw in every heart. Lines were drawn, voices raised, steel unsheathed. And just like that, the kingdom that had sought the Grail was at war with itself. Guinevere, sentenced by law to burn, stood at the pyre with eyes unclouded. She did not weep. She did not plead. She only looked to the hills where Lancelot had vanished. And in the final moment, when the flame was nearly touched to the wood, he returned. He rode through the crowd like wind through trees, silent, sudden, and unstoppable. He freed her, killed those who barred him, and fled once more, this time with the stain of blood upon his hands. The cost was irreversible. Arthur, heartbroken not by treason, but by the truth of love misaligned, gathered his knights and prepared for war. Mordred, seeing his chance, prepared for something else. The betrayal was not in the love. It was in the silence that came before, in the years of not speaking, of denying what was true, until it could only erupt. Guinevere returned to the court, not as queen, but as penitent. She took no crown. She asked for no forgiveness. Arthur saw her once in the chapel where they had been wed. He looked at her, this woman he had loved and led and lost. "You gave me peace," he said, "and I gave you duty." She shook her head, tears silent. "You gave me everything, except the part of you that needed me." There was no anger, only the weight of things past. And then they parted, not in hatred, but in sorrow. Camelot would never be the same. The round table still stood, the banners still flew, But something in the heart of the kingdom had shifted. The Golden Age had not ended with war. It had ended with grief. And in its place, a silence had begun to grow, one that would soon be filled with hoofbeats, with steel, and with the last breath of a dream once believed eternal, the fall of Camelot. It did not happen all at once. The fall of Camelot began not with a roar, but with silence, with glances that lasted too long, halls that echoed too loudly, and banners that fluttered just a little more ragged at the edges. There had been whispers before, about the Grail, about Lancelot, about Guinevere, but now there was something else in the air, a stillness that did not feel peaceful, a tension that moved through the corridors, like a cold wind in early spring. Arthur felt it, though he did not speak of it. The weight of betrayal had hollowed something inside him, not his sense of duty, but the warmth that had once filled it. The days grew longer, but his shadow grew taller. He wore his crown, yes, but more like a stone than a symbol. He had not punished Guinevere. He had not hunted Lancelot. He had simply let them go. But in doing so, he had let go of something in himself, too. The round table, once whole, was now fractured. Some seats remained empty, those lost in the Grail quest, those taken by time. Others sat in tension, old loyalties clashing with new regrets. And at one edge of the table sat Mordred, Arthur's son, though not by choice, born of a trick, raised in shadows. Mordred had waited his entire life for a moment like this. A moment when the seams of Camelot would stretch thin, when the king's armor would crack, not in steel, but in spirit. He began to gather power quietly. He did not challenge Arthur directly. He made alliances in whispers. He visited distant lords, offered promises, flatteries, small favors that grew into larger debts. And through it all, he smiled. To the court, he played the loyal knight. To the world beyond Camelot, he became a symbol of something new, of a kingdom tired of restraint, tired of ideals, tired of waiting. Where Arthur had once ruled by legend, Mordred offered change, truth, not peace, just change, just change. And for many, that was enough. And for many, that was enough. The breaking point came, not with fire, but with parchment. One spring morning, as dew still clung to the windows of the great hall, a messenger arrived with news from the north. Lancelot had raised a fortress, not in rebellion, he claimed, but in refuge. He had taken no cities. He had led no raids, but his presence, his name, was enough. Arthur's council met for 3 days. Some urged peace, some demanded war, and Arthur, tired beyond words, finally stood and said, "I will not strike the man who once saved my life, but I will ride to ask why he hides behind walls built of silence." The army gathered not with cheers, but with a sense of duty. Knights once bound by oath now rode with divided hearts. And in Arthur's absence, Mordred made his move. He returned to Camelot while the king rode north. He stood before the court and declared that Arthur had fallen in battle. He entered a forged letter. He wore grief upon his face, like a mask carved by the gods. And then he claimed the throne. Some wept, some questioned, but many, too many, accepted. The Golden Age had grown brittle, and brittle things do not break gently. When word reached Arthur, he did not weep. He did not scream. He simply closed his eyes, as if something he had long expected had finally arrived. He did not ride back in anger. He rode back in silence. Lancelot offered to march beside him. Arthur refused. "This is my burden," he said, "not yours." And so the last ride began. Arthur, with a small band of loyal knights, crossed the hills of Albion. As the skies darkened and thunder rolled across the moors, he returned not to Camelot, but to the field of Camlan. There, beneath a grey sky choked with mist, Mordred waited, not alone. His banner flew high, his knights stood ready, And on that field, where grass had once grown untouched by war, the golden age came to an end. The battle did not begin with horns or speeches. It began with a single mistake. A knight drawing his sword to strike down a snake at his feet was seen as a signal. Blades were raised, orders lost. Chaos bloomed like fire.
Steel clashed against steel. Brothers fought brothers. Old friends met with shields instead of words. The air filled with the sound of shouting, of hooves, of sorrow. Arthur fought at the front, not as a king in gold, but as a man in grief. He cut through Mordred's line with fury, not for glory, not for land, but because something sacred had been broken. In the final hour, when the mist was so thick that friend and foe could no longer be told apart, Arthur found Mordred. They stood alone, father and son, king and heir, dream and nightmare. No words passed between them, only steel. Arthur struck first, driving his blade deep into Mordred's side. But even as he fell, Mordred drove his own weapon through Arthur's chest. Both staggered. Both fell, and the mist swallowed them. When the battle ended, only a few remained. The field was silent once more. So many gone, so much lost. Sir Bedivere, the last of the loyal, found Arthur still breathing, barely. He carried him to the water's edge, where the lake glistened with pale light. Arthur, his breath shallow, whispered only, "Take Excalibur. Return it to the lake." 3 times Bedivere tried. Twice he failed, unable to part with such a relic. But the 3rd time he cast the sword into the waters, and from beneath the surface, a hand rose, clad in white, silent, sure. It caught the blade, and the lake was still. A boat awaited. Dark wood, veiled figures, no oars, only stillness. Bedivere lifted Arthur into the barge. The king said nothing more. The vessel drifted silent and slow into the mist, and with it, the dream of Camelot faded. But legends do not die. They rest. And some say Arthur sleeps still beneath a mountain, in a place where time does not pass, that he will return when Albion needs him most. Until then, the stones of Camelot remain, weathered, covered in moss, half forgotten. But if you stand there at dusk, when the sun touches the hills, just so, you might hear it, the faint echo of hoofbeats, the clink of armor, the memory of a golden age, not gone, but waiting, the final battle. It began before the sun rose. A pale mist lay over the land, curling between the heather and stones, like breath exhaled from the earth itself. The land seemed to know what was coming. Even the birds were quiet. Far in the east, where the light barely touched the horizon, 2 banners fluttered, one marked with the golden dragon of Arthur, and one bearing the black sigil of Mordred. No horns sounded, no drums echoed, just stillness. And into that stillness rode the last army of Camelot. They were fewer than in days past, older, wearier, but no less noble. Their armor bore scratches from 100 battles. Their faces were marked by both time and sorrow. Some had quested for the Grail. Some had buried brothers. All of them rode for something greater than revenge. Arthur himself did not wear a crown. He wore a simple helm, his cloak clasped with a brooch once given to him by Guinevere in brighter times. His eyes, deep, clear, and unsparing, scanned the land ahead, not for opportunity, but for the end. He knew it would come today, not because of prophecy, though there had been many, not because of fear, but because peace long pursued had slipped between his fingers, and what remained was duty. One last act, one last dawn. Across the field, Mordred's forces waited in ordered silence. His army was younger, hungrier, sharpened by bitterness, and bound by promises of change. Many did not hate Arthur. They simply believed his time had passed. Mordred himself stood upon a rise, his armor black as slate, trimmed with silver. He did not tremble. He did not speak. He waited, because he knew that in moments such as these, at the turning point of legends, time slows. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. The 2 sides faced each other across a narrow valley, choked with mist, and somewhere within that silence, a decision was made. The first blade was drawn not out of hatred, but from fear. A knight, startled by a serpent slithering near his boot, raised his sword instinctively, a glint of steel in the dim light. A signal, though, and then, Like flint meeting stone, chaos, shouts, footsteps, the clash of iron on iron. Steel rang like bells calling the dead, and the final battle began. Arthur fought not with fury, but with grace. He moved through the field like a figure from a forgotten age, each strike measured, each defense calm. His sword did not hunger for blood. It simply completed its purpose, one movement at a time. Around him, the world blurred into motion. Knights who had once sat together at the round table now met in battle. Friends on opposite sides clashed in silence, their blades doing the speaking their hearts could not bear. The ground turned dark with trampled earth and spilled dreams. Yet even as the day wore on, Arthur remained untouched, not by luck, but by something deeper, as if the land itself refused to take him before his final task was done. Mordred did not wait long to enter the fray. He had never fought like Arthur. His style was brutal, direct, unrelenting, like the weight of inevitability crashing through stone. He did not speak as he cut down knights in his path. His face was expressionless, unreadable, not cold, not cruel, but resolved. He did not seek victory in numbers. He sought Arthur, and slowly, as the day crept forward and the sun rose high above the mist, the two drew near. Their meeting came in the hush between battles, when the wounded were dragged aside, and the survivors paused to breathe. Arthur, sword in hand, stepped onto the high ridge. Mordred was waiting. They did not rush. They did not posture. They walked toward each other with the slow, measured steps of men who had rehearsed this moment, in dreams and dreads alike. The field around them seemed to shrink. Even the wind died down, and then they fought. The duel was not swift, nor was it spectacular. It was not a clash of gods. It was two men bound by blood, divided by fate, meeting where words had failed. Steel met steel, blow after blow. The ringing echoed across the hills like tolling bells. Arthur was steady, fluid. Mordred was relentless, punishing. Neither yielded. They circled, struck, countered, and then, in a final blur of movement, Arthur drove his blade through Mordred's chest. But as the younger man fell, he surged forward, impaling Arthur with his own broken spear. For a moment, they stood together, bound by the weapons that had betrayed them both. Then slowly, Mordred collapsed, and Arthur sank to one knee. It did not rain. The sky remained silent, as if even the heavens could not decide whether to mourn or watch. Arthur, wounded and gasping, looked out over the field of Camelot, now littered with fallen banners, broken shields, and the bodies of men who had once dreamed together. He did not cry. He simply closed his eyes, and in the stillness of that moment, it was as if time itself held its breath. Bedivere found him near dusk. The last night, bloody, bruised, his armor cracked, his face pale with grief. Arthur's breath came in shallow waves. "The sword," he whispered. "Take it to the lake." Bedivere nodded and lifted Excalibur, the king's sword, forged not by men, but by mystery, a blade that had served peace more than war. He walked to the lake's edge, wide, dark, and silent, and on his third attempt he did as Arthur asked. He cast Excalibur into the water, and from beneath the surface a hand rose, pale, serene, grasping the hilt before vanishing into the deep. When Bedivere returned, Arthur smiled faintly. "Then it is done." They did not build a tomb. Instead, Bedivere carried Arthur's body to the shore, where a barge waited, black and still. Figures stood aboard it, veiled in white. No words were spoken as they received the fallen king. No oars moved, and yet the barge drifted, into the mist, into legend. The last time Bedivere saw Arthur, he lay beneath a dark canopy, hands crossed, his crown at his side. The boat disappeared into the morning fog, and with it, the age of Camelot came to an end, but not forever. Some say Arthur did not die, that he sleeps beneath a hollow hill where time does not touch him, that one day, when the land is broken and hope is lost, he will return, sword in hand, light in his eyes. Until then, we remember him not as a man of war, but as a king who dreamed of peace. Arthur's departure to Avalon.
Night was falling by the time the barge reached the lake's center. The waters, once stirred by war and wind, had stilled completely.
There was no current, no splash of oar, only the slow drift of the vessel across glass-smooth darkness. On the deck, cloaked figures stood in silence. They were neither mourners nor messengers, neither angels nor queens, though some would later claim they were all of these at once. They did not speak, they did not sing, they simply watched over Arthur, the wounded king lying still beneath a canopy of black velvet. His armor had been removed, his crown was set beside him, his eyes were closed, not in death, not quite, but in something softer, like the deepest sleep around him. The air shimmered faintly, not with fire or magic, but with a strange kind of peace, as though the world itself was exhaling. They sailed west, far beyond the edges of Albion, past reed-choked inlets and forgotten rivers, past the borders marked on any map. The sky grew paler as they moved. Not darker, not night exactly, more like an endless dusk stretched out in all directions. Somewhere along the horizon, a faint light glowed, not from sun or moon, but from something timeless, something waiting. The barge did not hurry. It moved, as if guided not by hands, but by memory. Legends say that the boat carried him to Avalon, not a kingdom, not a city, but a place apart, a place beyond grief and glory, beyond crown and sword, beyond the burden of being a king. Avalon was said to lie between the worlds, neither fully earth nor fully dream. A land of soft hills and silver trees, where no one aged, where the rivers sang without sound, and where time curved inward like the petals of a flower. It could not be reached by road or compass, only by release, only by letting go. When they reached the shore, the women stepped ashore first. The tallest among them, Morgana, it is said, lifted Arthur's body, as gently as if he were a child. He did not stir, but a faint flush of warmth had returned to his cheeks. They carried him across a stone path, its surface lined with moss and soft white flowers that glowed faintly beneath their feet. The land around them was quiet, not in silence, but in fullness. No birds, no insects, only the hum of being. A lake mirrored the sky. Mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants, and in the very center stood a small tower, round, smooth, grown from the rock itself. They entered, bearing the once and future king. Inside, the chamber was open to the air with walls of vine-wrapped stone and a ceiling of living wood. A single bed of woven branches stood in the center, surrounded by shallow pools of clear water that reflected the stars. They laid Arthur there. His hands, still strong, were crossed over his chest. His brow, once furrowed with decision and weight, was smooth now, peaceful. They watched him for hours, for days. It's hard to say because in Avalon time does not pass. It folds. It breathes. Some say he sleeps still. That he is not dead nor dreaming, but waiting. His soul held in stasis, his breath caught between worlds. Others say he woke once briefly, looked around the chamber and wept, not from pain, but from knowing it was over. The burden had been lifted. The dream had been laid to rest. But most say he simply sleeps, not alone. The women stay with him, the ones who bore him across the lake. They tend the fire, though it never goes out. They tend the garden, though it never overgrows. And they wait for a horn to sound, for a shadow to fall, for a moment when Albion breaks again, when its people lose more than they can bear. And then it is said, Arthur will rise. His sword lies beside him, not in its scabbard, but resting freely. Its edge dulled, not by use, but by time. Its runes have faded. Its hilt is worn smooth, but it still pulses softly like a heartbeat beneath stone. Because Excalibur was never only a weapon, it was a symbol of promise, of balance, of a leader who ruled not with force, but with vision. And that vision, though distant, is not lost. It sleeps too, waiting. Meanwhile, the world moved on. Camelot fell into legend. The Round Table was never rebuilt. Its nights passed into song and silence. The castle crumbled slowly, stone by stone.
until only moss-covered ruins remained. Children played among them, unaware of what had stood. Stories were told beside hearths, sometimes wrong, often embellished, but always with that same quiet ache.
There was once a king who dreamed of something better, and sometimes just before dawn. If you walk the shoreline of certain lakes in the farthest reaches of the isles, you might see a shape in the mist, a barge drifting slowly, a figure lying still, hands crossed, eyes closed, and you'll wonder, is it him? And maybe for that moment it is. Arthur's departure was not an ending. It was a pause, a comma, in the sentence of a land still writing its story. Because greatness does not vanish. It rests. It changes shape. And in every act of courage, in every oath kept, in every moment where peace is chosen over power, he lives on. The once and future king, sleeping still in Avalon, waiting for the call. I hope you enjoyed tonight's sleep story, tracing the full tale of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. From the whispered prophecy and the sword in the stone, to the rise of Camelot, the quests for honor and truth, the heartbreak of betrayal, and the final voyage to Avalon. This has been a journey through one of the most beloved legends in all of Western lore. If you're still awake, that's perfectly okay. Just let your breath slow, your thoughts soften, like fog drifting over a quiet lake. There's no need to remember every name or every moment. The story has done its work. It will stay with you somewhere, just beneath the surface. And if you'd like to explore more, we have many other sleep stories waiting. Journeys through myth and memory, history and imagination, all gently told to carry you toward calm and peaceful sleep. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Wherever you are, beneath stars, beside oceans, or wrapped in blankets on a rainy evening, I wish you stillness, ease, and a deep restorative rest. Sleep well,